Well, good morning and welcome to the final day of the PFF Summit 2019. I'm Dr. Ayodeji Adegunsoye, and I'm joined this morning by Dr. Justin Oldham. We'd like to thank the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation and really all of our excellent speakers over the past 2 days. This has been a fantastic program with so much learning and sharing to help us better treat and care for our patients with pulmonary fibrosis. In particular, we're now more prepared to tackle and better treat these patients and win the fight against pulmonary fibrosis. Justin?
Thanks, Deji. Good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Oldham from UC Davis. We have a great set of speakers this morning. We do ask that you hold your questions until the end. I think that video was a perfect segue into the title of this morning's talk, which is Clinical Trials, Empowering Patients to Participate. As we saw with all the great lectures yesterday, it really is a hopeful and exciting time to be in the world of interstitial lung disease research, including clinical trials research. One recurring theme that we heard yesterday is how important it is for patients to participate in clinical trials. We couldn't do any of this without you, the patients. And so how do we go about engaging patients to participate in clinical trials? Well, this morning's first speaker is Bray Patrick Lake, who's the director of the Strategic Partnerships at Adaptors Health, who's going to come share her thoughts with us on this topic. So Bray develops collaborations to support the design and implementation of patient-centered clinical trials. She serves on the All of Us National Advisory Panel, the Digital Medicine Society for Scientific Leadership Board, and the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine, Health Science Policy Board. So please join me in welcoming Bray Patrick Lake.
Good morning. Thank you for your warm welcome. Before we get started, I just want you all to know how amazing it is to see this group. I do a good number of these type of talks, and this is seriously impressive, probably in the top 3 that I've been to in the last 10 years as far as getting a robust community. So if you don't mind, we're just going to open with a little bit of selfie action. I'm going to start here and take just a couple of pictures going across the room. Okay, you guys. 1, 2, 3, shout out from this side of the room. Thank you. Yay, okay, 1, 2, 3 in the middle, and 1, 2, 3 on this side. Thank you. Okay, it's important for me to share that and to remember it because it's just incredible, all of the energy and all the ideas and all of the opportunities that are here in this room right now with us. So I am a patient advocate, primarily living with a cardiac and a neuro condition, but I will say I lost my mother-in-law to IPF. It's been about 3 years, and she was one of the good mother-in-laws that we would have hoped to keep in our family. And so she did participate in clinical trials, and unfortunately, her life was just not long for all of us. So I am here for her today, in addition to serving as my own advocate and spokesperson. I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in. So I work currently at Adaptors Health, which is a company that finds new ways to measure health in everyday life using digital technologies. This is the most important slide in my deck. Because I am a patient person and I've come from a patient background and I've worked in academia and I've worked in a variety of different settings with sponsors and now in tech, there's a lot of times that what I say may not be exactly the way somebody would wish that I would have said that. I tend to be provocative. So I'm going to go ahead and just give myself a free pass this morning so we can have more fun. This is my timeline, and you don't have to read all of this. What you need to know is that basically I was a totally normal person 10 years ago. I was living my life. I had small kids. I had a career. And I had a neuro event that then led me to discover that I had a hole in my heart condition that I'd probably been born with, but I think through my pregnancies, the defect probably got stretched out. My quality of life was very low, and when I was 30s, I was put on oxygen, and that was kind of it. So I went on this quest to find answers about my condition. There was no patient group. There was no unbiased scientific information available to me. And I started searching, and I was going to my physicians basically saying, my quality of life is so poor, what else is there? Because I was not doing well on the existing therapies. And I ended up self-referring to a clinical trial. So first, what's wrong with this picture is that I had to ask, and I had to push, and I had to get myself into a trial. I joke to this day that I'm the only person that's ever used clinicaltrials.gov in the entire country and actually successfully referred to a clinical trial. So I actually got in. And then, sadly, the trial was aborted for low and slow enrollment. And how I found that out was sitting at the breakfast table with my kids, and I got a little ding, of a Google alert. And in the press, like there was a scientific conference going on, patient hadn't been notified, and basically the company had just announced this to the world without ever getting in touch with us. And it was shocking. So in this trial, I was in the arm of the trial that received an implanted cardiac device. And while I was doing well, I knew that there were some patients that weren't doing well. And so it was very scary. And then I set off on this quest to try to get my information and find out what happened with the trial. And it was a really big mess. So that was kind of my impetus where I got one dropped into, you're no longer just a well, normal person. Now you're living with a disease. You're fighting for yourself. And now I'm trying to figure out what does it mean the rest of my life after this clinical trial. So from that, I wrote up some comments out of this experience and just put them in the mail to USA Today for the FDA at that time was doing transparency hearings, and I was trying to get clinical trial data. And I ended up getting selected and flying to Washington to testify, and I thought this was like a town hall or a PTA type of meeting. And I walked in with zero experience, and it was a full-blown panel with television cameras and big wigs who were working in the space. And I was thrown onto that panel, but from there, the FDA said, we really need to hear more from patients like you. If people like you don't help us change and make this experience what it needs to be, then we're never going to change. And so from there, I ended up going on to, be in the patient rep program at FDA, which I've been in for 10 years. I went on to found a disease advocacy organization. Most of our stuff is done online. And then I started getting more involved in national research issues as I was realizing a lot of the things can't be fixed by one patient or one organization. So you don't really need to know the rest of this timeline. But what was really important to me is that at my worst, when things couldn't have been worse in this trial, and I was somewhat angry and scared, this doctor, John Carroll, for those of you who live in Denver and know him from the University of Colorado Hospital, so he was the PI on the trial on the cardiac side. This was a cardiac and neuro trial. And to his credit, I reached out to him. And again, I mentioned I was somewhat frustrated, and I can be a bit spicy if you haven't figured that out. But he took the time to answer my questions. And we had this kind of trust dance of, he agreed this was wrong. He didn't know the trial was going to be stopped. He didn't know the sponsor was going to do what they did. And it also hurt him because he had hired staff. He had put the research infrastructure in place, and he had a lot of patients. And this was not the way to be treating patients, in his opinion. So we started having phone calls and coffees, and he really explained to me how industry-funded trials worked because I didn't understand. I have a master's in forensic science, and I honestly thought that the NIH did all of the research. And this particular company, I thought, was the one that had these great TV commercials about treating kids with cancer. So I didn't even understand after I had signed all the forms what was really involved. But he and I basically started to come up with a plan of how we would constructively change this. How would we make this right for patients in the future? What could we do together? He also helped me learn more about the science. And this also started on his side by admitting we have a lot to learn, which a lot of doctors didn't do. They weren't saying, there are all these unanswered questions, because sometimes that seems scary to patients when you're paying an expert and you want an answer. It's very hard to say, I don't know. And he was willing to say, this is where the evidence is, and these are the questions we haven't answered. So we set off. I formed the patient group, but he helped me put together the medical advisory. And so we really came up with a strategic agenda. The foundation did a scientific summit where we had NIH, FDA, AHRQ, and then we had neurologists, cardiologists, patients all sitting around the room deciding what we needed to tackle. So this was the local person in my life that helped me figure out how to do this. And he also helped me figure out how to navigate these forums. I didn't know how to really get in and how to participate and how to be productive. So this was a critical relationship. And then I later took a job at Duke University in the School of Medicine, which is kind of laughable because they wouldn't have let me in as an undergrad in a million years. But I went to work there at the School of Medicine later. And this was because I was doing more systemic work on engaging multiple patient groups and trying to solve issues in a clinical trial enterprise. But Rob Califf, who was our director of Translational Medicine Institute at the time, who later went on to be the FDA commissioner under the Obama administration, treated me as an equal. So I didn't go to medical school. I certainly didn't put all the time and the effort that he did, but he listened to me, and he helped me kind of tease out what my issues were and what the patient role was in the patient voice. And what was really important is that he believed patients could serve in position of leadership and would push patients, into those roles, and then tell everybody, stand back and settle down. It's okay. Listen to the patients. They can actually lead the way. And he also recognized that patients, better than anybody else, have the ability to change the research ecosystem. And so since this time, I came to Duke in 2012, we had a heck of a lot of stuff that's happened nationally that I'll speak to in another couple slides. But basically, my personal activation started with take care of my own health, get myself settled, get myself in a place where I'm not in crisis every day. When you live with a disease, you're at what I call the tyranny of the moment. And sometimes it's all you can do to get through the day. Then I started helping other patients like myself. And so that was really, through a Facebook group and through online chat rooms, and then this disease advocacy group that I founded with other patients. Then we started to realize these issues are bigger than ourselves. So what can we do with other patient groups and other medical investigators and industry sponsors to really start changing the system? And then basically I eventually got up to the national level, which I'll tell you now, I need your help. There's been like 5 of us that finally make it into these final policy circles. And so just keep your ears open as I talk, because I need you to come on up and help me out. So why did I pick clinical trials as a focus? It could have been disease education, it could have been patient support, but all of our lives are dependent on clinical trials, and clinical trials in the US have been in crisis for a long time. So we know that they're taking longer to complete, they enroll slowly, the costs are increasing. We've had some investigators just pull out of research altogether because it's too difficult. And this is at a time when everything's evidence-based. So even to get therapies reimbursed, we have this burden of evidence. So it's kind of this crunch time where we need to know what are the best medical practices, what are the best diagnostics, what are the best alternatives for your condition. But it's not guesswork, it's all based on evidence. And so if we don't have successful trials, we lose. It's also taking way too long to get therapies to patients. And this graphic that says 12 years to get new treatments to patients, actually, this was at a time when it was estimated to cost about $2 billion to get a new drug to market. I just saw some data yesterday that said by 2025, that they're actually thinking that could double. And then I saw something exponential for 2045. The way we're tracking, this is not a joke. It was more than $20 billion to develop a drug. And that's ridiculous, and it hurts all of us. So I love this slide from the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy group. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a rare fatal disease for children, and it's progressive. And at the time that this qualitative interview was done with the patients and families, this was from a mom who basically said, I'm sitting here watching time tick and knowing that every month that goes by, my kid's less likely to be able to take advantage of this drug, even if it does work. And I find it excruciating and unconscionable. So these kids had to do a 6-minute walk test. If you progress past being able to do that, you couldn't even be in the trial. And then your option is death. So all I will say is that patients can't wait for answers, and every single one of us in this room has the power to change that. So in trials, to continue with the uplifting message this morning, we know that we're not enrolling efficiently. Our recruitment timelines are slipping. 37% of sites under-enroll, and 11% of sites, after you put up all that infrastructure, train everybody, 11% of sites actually fail to enroll even a single patient. There are also a lot of problems with the protocols. So in my case, I didn't even think I would screen into my trial. The inclusion and exclusion criteria were so stringent that often you have a hard time finding any real patients who will even fit the trial protocol. Or the study's not feasible. How many of you are having a hard time getting into your clinical visits and your sites? Does it take a lot of effort? Is there a lot of walking? Is it really hard for you to get in there? What if they schedule a full day of complex procedures and you're tired and you just can't go through that? We also know that a lot more data is being collected. And so we're really at kind of this tipping point where we need to make better clinical trial protocols. And then what if there is a problem with a protocol and you need to course correct? So the protocol is kind of the recipe to the trial, and then if you have to change it, it's called an amendment. In a phase 3 clinical trial, the average amendment costs $500,000 to implement in 8 weeks in cycle time. So you have to slow everything down, then you have to implement all of these changes across all of your sites. And in the meantime, you're burning time and you're burning money. And unfortunately, a lot of these things, the amendments could have been prevented up front. So how do we engage patients in the first place to even say, are you able to qualify for this protocol? Are you able to participate? We could have changed this up front before even opening the trial. And then finally, the kicker, we get something to market, and the way we studied it was in the cleanest population possible. So we basically also take all of the results and we average them. And so it's hard for us to even know who's going to receive benefit and who's going to receive harm. And to a patient, the most important question is, based on my personal characteristics, what can I expect my outcome to be? The other thing is that we are finding that oftentimes our diagnostics weren't quite right, and we don't even know if we started with the right patient to begin with. And so we are wasting our finite resources treating people that aren't at risk, won't benefit, and may experience unavoidable events that are adverse. And all of this we should be doing up front. So the good news, I'm done with like the mostly depressing part. Now we're at the place where there's an opportunity for a lot of change. So there are patients I know that have been on the front lines. Dana, if you're in this room somewhere, many people have been on the front lines really pushing for change at the FDA level. And we had patient-focused drug development really begin. And in the last few years, between really 2013 to now, there has never been more opportunity for patient voice to be involved in influencing medical product development. Probably the final one on here that's really important is the 21st Century Cures Act, which has really actually codified what we would call patient experience data. So your experiences, you do not have to have a PhD, you do not have to have an MD. Simply sharing your experiences about what's most important to you. What are your most burdensome symptoms? What outcomes are of most importance to you? If you are improving your quality of life, how would you like to measure that? What is most important to you? All of that is now acceptable data. And so a sponsor doesn't have to collect it. It could be a patient group that can actually now submit this, and it can be used to augment clinical trial data. And not only that, 21st Century Cures means that FDA actually has to say how they brought those patient insights into the clinical trial and in their decision-making when they approve a therapy and assess whether it's safe and effective. So there's a lot of opportunity, and you do not have to wait to be invited to the party. This group, certainly PFF, you could do some of your own gathering, and I expect you probably have. Now we're also moving to an entirely new model where it's not even qualitative interviews, it's not necessarily surveys, it's passive continuous data collection. And so working from apps, wearables, sensors, all of you are generating what we call ubiquitous person-generated health data at all times. And so now there are ways to structure that and bring that into our regulatory applications at FDA. There's been a real commitment to modernizing and innovating at the FDA through digital health technology tools. And so this means what you'll see is less visits to the clinic. You will have more time to participate and share data from your home. And then what this will also mean is that we are taking things about your life and your experience in living with pulmonary fibrosis that might currently be invisible, and now we have a way of making it visible. Things that used to be subjective. How are you feeling today? How are you functioning today? I think I moved pretty well. We can see a digital signal. It's now objective. And you don't have to come into a clinic to do that. I also think in the next 5 years, we'll lose the 6-minute walk test, and that will just be measured in your home. It will have the, I hope that was a cheer. Yeah, okay, I hate that test. Thank you. I'm working on that, and yeah, we do actually have new methods to do that. And then eventually, these things that are important to you, they'll become the endpoints in the clinical trial. So we'll still have our clinical trial, the clinical endpoints, but there will be measures to you that then in the product label, and when you get access to a product, you'll actually know how does that apply to you. And so then we move from being just clinically meaningful to the individual. But all of this depends on you, and are you sharing data, and are you participating, and are you bringing your voice to these opportunities to help shape medical product development. So with that, as an individual, I want to switch a little bit to the power of patient groups. The Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative is an FDA public-private partnership. It's hosted by Duke University, but has 80 different members. That 20% are patient groups. There are clinician investigators, there are institutional review boards, academics, and industry. And basically, this city came together and funded a project around patient groups and clinical trials because we saw some things that were shifting. So basically, patient groups probably one of the earlier ones, the American Cancer Society, was doing a lot to raise disease awareness. So everybody might have been to a Hill Day, or you might have done a walkathon. Over time, these groups started getting more targeted and actually raising money for research and bringing that money into research, and also going to the Hill and lobbying for an increase in biomedical research funding, which is incredibly important. These investigators, they need money to do the job, to do the basic science, to then help bring new therapies to all of you. Then we started seeing patient groups taking on the role of leading drug development and basically putting together their assets and saying, okay, we're gonna invest in a cell line, we're gonna invest in an animal model. You know what you can invest in? Your mailing list is incredibly powerful. All of these things, when you aggregate people, when you aggregate information, when you do a natural history study, if you're asked to participate in a registry, please, by all means, do everything you can to participate. It can be even as simple as if your patient group sends you a survey. These are all assets that can be deployed through the medical product development continuum, and that can be used to de-risk research and increase return on investment. So the City Project basically started to compile all of the activities that some of these groups that seem to be having a real impact on research were doing. And it used to be kind of mom and apple pie. You should engage patients because it's the right thing to do. It's a different day now. You should engage patients because you're stupid if you don't, and you're going to go out of business because your partner will. Whoever your competitor is, if they're actually pulling through those patient insights and working actively with the patient group in a power-sharing type of way and recognizing them as equal partners, they're getting a lot further because the partners are bringing all of these different assets to the party. So basically, through continuous active engagement, and let me back up because maybe we never talked about what engagement is. Engagement is a bidirectional relationship that creates mutual benefit. It's not transactional, it's not for the taking, it's bidirectional, and it creates mutual benefit. So basically, this has the effect of de-risking the early stage development. So drug developers, if you're at a company, you have to decide, I've got these assets, how am I going to invest them? What can you do if a patient group has all of these assets and capabilities and they can lower that threshold to get started? What if they fund some basic translational research in the beginning that helps you get over that hurdle? This is all really important. And then also reducing uncertainty in the regulatory process. So working closely with FDA, knowing that you're aligned with patient groups and that you and patient groups are finding the same unmet need and that things are important from both of your perspectives. So then you can bring patient insights into the actual development of the research. And so we get better study questions, we get more efficient recruitment and retention, fewer protocol amendments, simply by talking to patients up front. I'll give you an example of a patient group where the sponsor put a protocol together in isolation, took it to the FDA signed off on it, and then when they brought it to the patient group, and this is the phase, instead of let's co-develop this, they said, we want you to recruit this for us, which is a no-no. The patient group said, that's great, in your inclusion-exclusion criteria, you have a drug that basically says if any patients are on this drug, you can't participate in this research. But all of our kids, so this was a pediatric disease, by age 12, every single one of our kids with this condition is on an antipsychotic medication. So you've essentially disqualified your entire clinical trial population by not talking to us. So these are the kinds of things. Talk to the patients up front, you would actually know, and you could have prevented that. So then they had to do a protocol amendment, which I mentioned costs money. So getting back to this slide, procedures that are better suited to the patient. If patients aren't going to come in and participate, we need to know that up front. And then clinical endpoints that are well-grounded in the natural history of disease and that patients view as being most meaningful. I've talked a little bit about what you can bring in the pre-discovery phase as far as cell lines, animal models, natural history disease, your registries, super important. Please continue to grow those over time and explore new biomarkers. And I think this one is probably really important. So when you've actually got a trial, you should have patients who are on your steering committees, on your executive committees, serving as true research partners. We want to start creating this value. And so patients need to talk about what that value is and help you develop your recruitment and retention plans. We even have patients serving on the Data Safety Monitoring Board. And it's interesting, that's a group that evaluates risks and can decide, should we stop this trial? Is there too much risk to patients? And I often find that it's the patient that is saying, based on where we are and the trajectory of our disease, we're willing to accept that risk. It's not unreasonable. Please don't stop that trial. And it's just kind of interesting because I think when we started putting those models in place, most people thought that's not what was going to happen, that patients would be freaked out by risk and would actually, cause problems. And that's not what happened. And then any trial communications, any informed consent forms or processes, that should all be co-developed with patients. It's very simple. We're never going to get rid of all the legalese, but we need to make sure that patients are getting their research questions answered. What are the most important benefits and risks when trying to decide to participate in a trial? And those 40-page documents just don't do it. So we need to be doing better. Also, I think the FDA review and approval process, people are afraid to bring patients to these meetings. So even when you're in a Type B meeting and you're planning your project, you need to have patient voice in that room. They will inevitably help the FDA understand the need for the trial and the endpoints that you have brought in, and really even the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then certainly taking patients with you to post-phase meetings to evaluate the data and decide whether you're moving on to the next phase and really start to get some of that initial feedback. And then let's say you're not invited to any of those meetings. Any of you can go to an advisory committee meeting and testify in the public hearing. So I know it's hard to travel to DC, but you can go and you get 3 minutes to talk about what's most important to you when living with this disease and the unmet need and why you think there's a need for a particular medical product if that's what they're reviewing. And then you can also sign up to participate in the patient rep program. I don't know if Terry Barnes is here this morning, but I think maybe she was in it. But there's opportunity to have voice. This is a real live example from a trial that we did in the PCORNet, which is a national clinical data research network. And this group is called the Adaptors. So these are normal people. They don't have any particular expertise other than living with their condition. We basically did a screening and put together a group of 8 patient partners who helped us co-design the protocol, co-design the consent form and process. They designed our study protocol and our study portal, which is really important because even on the study portal, the print was too small. And so this is an older adult population. They're like, I can't see that. How am I going to click through this? What am I going to do? Very important things that help the research go more rapidly. They've also participated in a lot of Facebook Live. They've done some social media. They've reached out. They've helped enhance recruitment and certainly retention. And they are full partners in the study on all committees. So those of you who haven't been doing this, let's talk about what it does take to do it. So for sponsors and researchers, let me just make a few suggestions. Again, you don't need PhDs, you don't need nurses, you don't need JDs or MDs on these trial committees or as research partners. They can be normal people. But you should provide an orientation to clinical trials and the research system. I don't know how many of you have heard the alphabet soup. Did you know what a double-blinded randomized control trial was or an IRB was? Probably not. These are simple dictionaries. You can come up with common language, explain acronyms. Make room in a discussion for advocates. So if a scientific discussion is going on, you can still stop the conversation, turn to your normal person and partner, and say, what do you think about this? And if they're like, well, that's too scientific for me to answer, then you can pull out, elicit something from their perspective that is very important. This is all a co-learning process, and this is the entire model. You should be constantly co-learning with your patient partners. You can share knowledge about how the system actually works and actually help them be more successful in navigating and giving them confidence in participating in these forums. Mutually establishing a scientific agenda, that's a big one, and I think the foundation is probably doing that. But most importantly, you could start today, you could meet a patient partner today, avoid being transactional. You want to build this relationship and nurture it over time, and then eventually you'll have people that can serve as your co-investigators, they can serve on your trial teams, and in general, advise on registry activities over time. So for patients, what I implore you to do is take whatever your passion, your curiosity is, and channel that towards constructive criticism. I mentioned I was angry earlier when I first found out that this trial was aborted. That's great, but that's not very useful unless you make it constructive. So there are a lot of things that you can do. You can educate your peers. You can serve on these clinical trial design activities. I've mentioned, be a co-investigator in research, patient advisory board member, research navigator. The gentleman in the video, that's brilliant, talking to your peers about the value of research. It's a great goal to have every patient in a trial all the time. And then if you can, and as you grow over time, you can get involved in the national research policy activities. So I encourage all of you to find a co-investigator. It could also be a nurse investigator. They're equally awesome. It could be somebody who's running a support group at your care center. But get that co-learning relationship going on. Also ask them how to navigate forums. This is really important. There are a lot of hidden rules and dynamics. I'll give you one really important rule for participating in these groups. Be brief, be bright, be done. Get your narrative down to just a few seconds. Too often, even in introductions, we've lost the audience because a patient partner spends 20 minutes talking about themselves because they think you invited me here to talk about myself. Well, yes and no. So we want you to make that succinct, and then we want to get down to business. And so these are hidden rules that whoever your patient or your co-investigator partner is can help you navigate. And then have confidence in your lived experience. Don't let anybody make you feel like you are lesser. You are the ones who are the experts in your disease. And so have confidence in that, bring that to whatever the activity is, but then also work to educate yourself about research over time. You will be more successful, but you don't have to be an expert. And then I will also say, it won't always be the right time in your life. If your health is just completely upside down, we totally get it. But I would say do whatever you can to help others like you, and then share your health data and participate in a trial, participate in a registry. You can do it passively for the most part, but do and share something. Hopefully everybody will get the slides. I just put together a slide about some of the groups in the national research ecosystem that I think you should learn about if you want to navigate that area, but we're not going to go through that now. So basically, in conclusion, there has never been more opportunity to bring patient voice to clinical trial design and medical product development. Engage patients early, often, and always to drive high-quality trials and de-risk research and development. So sponsors and researchers, cultivate your partnerships. Today is an awesome day to begin. Don't leave here without identifying at least one patient partner. Patients, bring your voice to the design of clinical trials and the research ecosystem. If now is not the right time, just ensure you are sharing your data and you're encouraging others to participate in clinical trials and foundation activities. Thank you.